Bitcoin is at a critical point in this cycle, and with so many conflicting opinions, it can be hard to know what to expect next. But if you focus on the data that really matters, it can show not only what's going to happen in the coming days and weeks, but also the coming months and years. So we'll get straight into it here on the short-term holder MVRV chart we have here on BitcoinMagazinePro.com. Now we have so much stuff to cover today, some amazing data points and charts, some that I've never been seen before. So strap in, it's going to be a busy one. Lots of data today, but the short-term holder MVRV, based on the short-term holder realized price, the average accumulation or cost basis for new market participants, historically for Bitcoin has acted almost as a moving level of support and resistance. And if we just zoom in onto the current price section, we can see Bitcoin is practically right on this level, around $113,000. So even if we zoom out after the massive catastrophic liquidation event we had earlier in the month, we can see there's not a whole lot we really need to be worried about. And especially if Bitcoin can hold above this level, then it gives us some good indication that the bulls are in control. Investors will have a little bit of confidence knowing they're at break even or potentially even a little bit of profit on their positions. So potentially are more willing to rotate more capital into the market. If we just look at 2017 as an example, every single time we came back down and retested this level or at a slight temporary dip beneath it, it was an amazing accumulation opportunity and really kickstarted the next trend of the up cycle. But that hasn't necessarily been true the entirety of this cycle. So hopefully we can sustain this. We don't spend too long beneath it, but we can take this a step further rather than just looking at the realized price. If we look at the market value to realized value ratio, essentially just the difference between the underlying price of Bitcoin and this realized price, what we get is this green and red line, which if we just look at this ratio, gives us some really good indications of where Bitcoin may find resistance and may find support within a cycle. So what I can do is if I just zoom way into this metric, what we can see throughout the past few cycles, there's been some very notable points on this chart where Bitcoin's price almost always bounces from or almost always reaches before having a retracement. We can see to the downside here, it practically always bounces from around the 0.6, 0.66 level. Pretty much every single time Bitcoin is in a big violent down move, this is a very good area to be accumulating. And on for more intra-cycle basis points, again, we can see throughout this cycle, especially if you can accumulate as this is getting towards kind of the 0.8 level, then again, some pretty good value for money on discounted BTC. But if we just zoom in and look towards potential upside targets for Bitcoin, because we're all bullish here, everyone's bearish in the comments, but I'm bullish. I'm keeping this basis until the data tells me otherwise. We can see, again, there's some very common points where Bitcoin potentially faces some resistance on the upside. We can see around this 1.33 level on multiple different instances in multiple different Bitcoin cycles. We can see this has been a very key turning point for the Bitcoin price action. So once new market participants are about at a 33% unrealized profit on their position, we usually get a little bit of a mean reversion, a little bit of a reality check for these new market participants. And again, above that, another very key level, about this 1.43 level on the chart, we can see, again, multiple different instances of Bitcoin coming to this point before having another retracement. So if we extend beyond that 1.33, then that 1.43 might be a good level to watch. And beyond that, again, if we look to pretty much market cycle peak points that we've seen in previous cycles, again, there's some very common points where Bitcoin usually has a little bit of resistance. We can see at multiple points throughout the 2017 cycle and on a couple of occasions in the previous 2020 to 2021 cycle, around this 1.64 level, 1.65 or so, it's not exact science, we can see a little bit of resistance here. So if we just go onto TradingView here, we can't actually get the exact short-term holder realized price data on TradingView. So what this is looking at is the rolling 155-day volume weighted average price, which right now is pretty much exactly at $113,000. So they match close enough that we can take some data from this and actually extrapolate it to give us some potential target prices. So again, just using data from the MVRV ratio, we're going to multiply this short-term holder realized price or rolling volume weighted average price by the levels we identified previously, 1.33, 1.43, 1.64. So again, what we can see is throughout this cycle so far, Bitcoin has on multiple occasions come and tested this level. As we first blew up past the short-term holder realized price off the bear cycle lows, we came and found resistance between these two bands, retested this short-term holder, and like I said, we do occasionally spend a little bit of time beneath it. But then as we ran up to 40K, bounced from these levels. As we ran up to $73,000, $74,000, bounced from this upper resistance point. And then again, between the first break of $100,000 and as Bitcoin came back down and retested above it again around these 1.3, 1.43 levels. So these are really key levels to be watching. Now what we can do is again kind of extrapolate the data that we're seeing and project these going forward. Now one thing you have to take into account, because anytime I do these maths predict or any type of forecasting videos, people will see videos I did a year ago and say, look how wrong you were. I know these are going to be wrong. The data is changing every single day. What we can do is just take the average trend. If things are going to continue moving in a similar trend to what they have been previously over the past 155 days or so, what we can do is project these forward. So if I add these lines onto the chart and just project these levels, taking the previous 155 days, the average slope of that data, and projecting it to the end of the year, what we can do is get some potential price targets. So this 1.33 level would put us at $160,000, the 1.43 just above $170,000, and this upper 1.63 level just a smidge beneath $200,000. So there could be a few good points of resistance and potential price targets to be watching if Bitcoin can continue to hold above this short-term holder realized price and move up. If we look to the long-term holder MVRV ratio, again, assuming diminishing returns, which we've seen over the past few cycles, just a really interesting point I noticed is if we look at the MVRV ratio just of long-term holders, look at the average accumulation price of Bitcoin's most experienced participants, we can see in 2017 it topped out at 36.2, and in the next cycle it topped out at 12.58. So what we can do is if I just take a calculator here and just look at 36.2, which was this peak that we set back in 2017, and divide that by 12.58. Again, the peak that we set in the previous cycle. What we get is a level of 2.88, pretty much rounded up. So that's the diminishing factor of the long-term holder MVRV peaks. Now, if we divide 12.58 by that 2.88 diminishing factor, we get a level of 4.368, or again, 4.37. We'll round it up slightly. If we look to where Bitcoin has already set a peak on the long-term holder MVRV of this cycle, 4.37. The diminishing factor seems to be fairly consistent. But again, this occurred when Bitcoin had just surpassed $100,000. We set highs $20,000 higher than this. So again, if we're under the assumption that Bitcoin for this cycle hasn't peaked, if we were to just reach levels that we've already reached this cycle, 4.37 on the long-term holder MVRV, then again, all we need to do is kind of work backwards. Look at the long-term holder realized price right now, which as I film this is about $37,400. And we just go 37,400 times 4.37, 4.36, then we get around $163,000, $164,000. But do keep in mind that these data points are changing. Every single day this is changing by a few dollars, a few $100 potentially. So these multiples are of course going to shift as Bitcoin changes. But we can take this one step further, the final step further, I promise. What we can do is actually change the MVRV so it's rolling on a 2-year basis. Because again, lots of people will look to the MVRV Z-score and say these diminishing peaks may not result in Bitcoin having as high scores as we have done in previous cycles, which is a fair assumption. Maybe we don't reach levels into this upper red sell zone from 7+ in this cycle. Maybe we reach 4, maybe we reach 5, 6, who knows? But if we look at the data on a rolling basis, again, we can kind of see clear and obvious patterns in this data where we don't necessarily see diminishing returns because the data is adapting and evolving to the changing market conditions. So if we would see a peak in this 3 region, then again, that could give us some insights that the market is getting very overheated, a level that we've already reached in this cycle, a level that marked the previous cycle top, and a level we reached multiple times in 2017. And one interesting thing to note is if we mark on this chart at a level around -1, again, something that's marked historical great opportunities to accumulate Bitcoin, we're actually much closer to the buy zone than we are to the sell zone according to the MVRV Z-score 2-year rolling basis chart. So what we have here is the MVRV ratio, but rather than looking at it on a 2-year rolling basis, If we look at through just a 100-day rolling basis, what we can see is we get considerably more frequent signals, much more intracycle based signals. And we can see the spikes to the upside on this have coincided with Bitcoin's local peaks, and big spikes to the downside have coincided with Bitcoin's major local bottoms. Again, great accumulation opportunity zones. So what we can do is, again, almost formulate an intracycle, either dollar cost average strategic buy zone area, or if you're more of a frequent trader, potential points to take some buy positions and potential take profit or short zones on the Bitcoin price action. And the chart's going to look a little messy when I do this, but if we just look to the highest points of data on this chart, so when this 100-day rolling MVRV goes above a value of 2 or beneath a value of -2, we can create almost buy and sell points on the Bitcoin price action. Now what I can do, looking through the entire history of Bitcoin practically, all the way back to the start of the 2017 cycle, or the 2015, 2016, 2017 cycle, is we can see this is marked almost perfectly. Great points to either take profit on your Bitcoin positions, potentially start scaling out, or start scaling in, accumulating discounted BTC. And because this is working on a much more frequent basis, it's not catching the exact market cycle lows only or the market cycle tops on its own. It's marking points throughout the Bitcoin cycle where accumulating or profit taking probably makes a little bit of sense, or at the very least, scaling back on your dollar cost averaging if we're getting to these upper red regions, and potentially increasing your strategic dollar cost averaging as we're getting into these low green buy areas, especially when we can see this providing confluence with just the standard MVRV Z score, the short-term holder MVRV, the long-term holder, and the 2-year rolling basis. And right now we're at a point where we're seeing a huge amount of accumulation signals on this 100-day rolling MVRV indicator. So again, this doesn't have to be something you implement immediately. This could be something you potentially check towards to see if we're in overheated conditions or potentially undervalued conditions, just to impact your strategic dollar cost averaging. But just looking at the average accumulation price, the cost basis of different market participants, and the unrealized profit and loss from these positions can give us unbelievable insights on what's likely to happen next for Bitcoin. And if we can continue to hold above the short-term holder realized price, then there's plenty of upside potential remaining for this cycle, and some pretty high price targets that we need to be keeping our eye on. So just to summarize, well, there's a lot of data in that video. It took a long time to put together. If you're not subscribed, if you haven't liked the video, if you haven't left a comment, then please do that. I really do appreciate it. But what we can see is that monitoring the realized price or average accumulation cost of specific market participants, like we'd see with the short-term holders, like we can see with the long-term holders, or just the all holders in general, we can get a good idea of where we currently are in this Bitcoin cycle, and also potentially highlight levels that we need to be watching in the future if we're to forecast them going forward. And based on the current projections, which I need to again reiterate, if you come back to this video in 2 years' time and leave a comment saying, wow, look how inaccurate that was, these data points are changing every single day. Please do take them with a grain of salt, but the closer we actually get to the end of the year and the closer we get to these levels, the more accurate these projections are going to be. What we can see is there is confluence to the upside. It targets around $160,000 to $170,000, but there is the potential for even higher, especially if we can reach those very high levels on the short-term hold at realized price levels. And if we start rapidly accelerating to the upside, people are going to have to start buying higher. So we're going to see that trend, that projection that we set into the future, start massively appreciating as well. And what we can do is adapt these data points to work more on an intracycle basis. So it's not just providing signals once every few years. If we look at a 100-day rolling basis, for example, then we can get some really accurate buy and sell signals that work on an intracycle basis for those a little bit more active in the market, potentially trading, buying and selling. Or like I said, if you're just a strategic dollar cost averager, you're not even looking to sell Bitcoin or take profit, because what do you want to rotate into? These can provide signals of when to potentially strategically dollar cost average into the market a little bit more aggressively. And if you'd like to see these metrics, the custom 100-day one, or any of the metrics added to Bitcoin Magazine Pro, then again, leave comments below. We do take them into account. And if you'd like to see the TradingView iterations of these made public, again, just let me know. I'll see what I can do. But for all the data that we discussed today, again, visit bitcoinmagazinepro.com, where you can consider becoming a site subscriber to gain access to a few of the charts we looked at today, as well as many, many more. And as long with that, you get the TradingView indicators, the API access, industry reports, and a hell of a lot more, all for a fraction of the standard industry price. And like I've said many, many times, These videos take a lot of effort to make, and a vast majority of you watching aren't even subscribed to the channel. So do leave some love below in the comment section and on social media, because again, I really do appreciate it. As always, thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.